Wait, they said what about this new beer style?
Isn't it just a gimmick? Yes, it's another gimmick. It's not new. It's a rebranded IPL to drive sales for an underperforming style.
Ooh.
Wouldn't a more accurate name be Warm IPL? Doesn't have the same ring, but... and it's sad to see the state of brewing, especially home brewing, revert back to the 70s and 80s anti-flavor, Pilsner-centric styles, given the almost limitless variety of beer around the world.
Whoa.
So extra
Yeah.
in their hate.
But there has to be somebody that's happy that this exists, right?
Yeah, there were people who commented stuff. Let's see. Love it. Just brewed one, and it's my idea of the perfect IPA to session on. Another person said, "Yo, it slaps. Love it." They're both distinct and awesome. Folks who disagree are always welcome to not buy them, but I personally think the unique process gives it an amazingly crisp and unique flavor. And then someone also said, "I'm all for anything that's the antithesis of New England IPAs." Fair.
Loving to hate, hating to love. What could have homebrewers so divided, so empowered and impassioned, but also enraged?
Cold IPAs.
Those brand new cold IPAs you may or may not have been hearing about. We hope you're hearing about them. We are Abby and Chip. We are in the brew cave of Northern Brewer. We're on the Northern Brewer marketing squad.
Digital team.
But more importantly, we're beer fans, we're beer nerds, and if you haven't heard of a cold IPA, that's surprising.
Where have you been?
We sure the heck have. Here in the Twin Cities where we're located, it seems like dozens of varieties have come out, especially in the first half of 2022. It seems to be the year of the cold IPA.
The year of the cold IPA.
For sure. So we just want to sit down, a little day drinking at work. We thought we would talk about what the style is, what the style isn't, taste a couple samples, and really just pontificate a little bit on a style, which isn't something we...
Yeah, respond to what we've been hearing. I mean, it's not a bad thing to get negative comments because it gives us a chance to be like, well, you're wrong. No, I'm just kidding. But to be like, you're right, it is very similar to this style or that style, but here's how it's different. So I think if you had thoughts about it, we will probably be responding to them.
For sure. So, and we also should say right off the top, we've recently published a blog article, well-researched, both sensorily and through interviews with pro brewers pointing us down the path of cold IPA. We're going to link to that in the video description. It also includes 2 homebrew scale recipes for 2 of the cold IPAs that we have from the Twin Cities. Before we dive too deep, if you like videos like this where we go in depth on a style, whether it's a new, upcoming, innovative style, or the classics that everybody loves to brew and drink, like this video, subscribe to Northern Brewer's YouTube channel, and make sure you ring that bell to get notified as soon as new content drops. So, without further ado, if you don't know what a cold IPA is at all, we're gonna do, I'm just gonna tell you real quick what a cold IPA is on paper. The 3 words that seem to sum it up best: dry, light-bodied, and hoppy. The grist is a light base malt, usually Pils or two-row. This keeps the beer, again, light-bodied, light-colored. A large percentage of flaked corn or rice, we're talking adjuncts here, and this really does dry the beer out. It might even add some of that slight adjunct flavor in the mix. Of course, we've got hops, and more hops. It might be bittered to 60 or 70 IBUs. It might not be bittered at all in the boil. It might be all whirlpool. It's definitely dry hopped. The style is, regardless of everything else, a showcase for hops, where kind of the pendulum is swinging away from hazy IPAs back to really hop forward IPAs with not much else in the way. And then after the hops, it's really about that yeast. Cold IPAs are fermented with lager yeast warm or ale yeast cold, meaning a lager yeast upwards to low or mid 60s, or an ale yeast downwards of upper 50s, low 60s. The idea is this keeps the yeast flavors and esters extremely low, leaving the beer very clean, once again, to push those hop flavors forward.
Is definitely not a hazy IPA.
It is not a hazy IPA. The brewery and brewer credited with this style, Wayfinder Brewing in Portland, brewer Kevin Davey, basically put out a manifesto saying this is meant to be the exact opposite of a hazy IPA. It's going to be clear, it's going to be crisp.
This is the antithesis.
Yeah, you're going to be able to see through it.
But it's also not a West Coast IPA.
Not a West Coast IPA. Doesn't include even a hint of sea malts, drier body. Yeah.
It's also not a brute IPA. Rest in peace. Rest in peace.
Brewed IPA, if you remember, I feel, and a couple other brewers I talked to feel like this is kind of trying to get to there without being that extreme. A brewed IPA required enzymes to dry it out. It was like bone dry, champagne dry. We didn't really have a lot of good versions that I tried locally here. It was kind of a West Coast thing.
And I think the one we hear the most, so I don't know if it's our favorite, but the least favorite, I don't know, but most common, like for a good reason, I get it. It's not an IPL.
It is not an IPL. And I mean, you're splitting hairs here, but I think that's the beauty of styles and sub-styles and being a beer. Like, what's the point of being a beer nerd if you can't innovate a new style by even just tweaking one thing? And here I think we're tweaking more. The thing with IPLs is they wouldn't kind of as a standard have this high ratio of adjuncts in the mix. And they also would have been fermented more classically like a lager, whereas this is being fermented oddly as either a lager or an ale because they're going the opposite direction.
Yeah,
So-
however you would normally brew that. I'm gonna read from Dan from our St. Paul store. He summed it up just like so succinctly, and even though like we're writers by profession, he summed it up so perfectly in just like a sentence. Without going too deep, a cold IPA has the grain bill of a cream ale, hops of a West Coast IPA, and is fermented high for a lager yeast or low for an ale yeast. So like I feel like that's a key takeaway of like if you're not really getting like, wait, it's this, but it's that, but it's this, like I think that's an easy way to put it.
Yep. Cream ale would kind of have corn specifically, if I'm not mistaken. I've seen a lot of varieties leaning on the flaked rice instead, but by and far, yeah, he kind of summed it up. And there's so many of those funny, like, well, isn't it just a pre-pro lager hop like a West Coast IPA?
There's a lot of, so it's this and you just change this, and it's like, that is beer. That's what beers are. It's, you just changed
I understand
one or two things.
There is a need to compare it to something, but I don't like when people write off a style by using a comparison. I like when somebody's like, oh, it's this evolved to this. So when people just straight up shoot it down because you're like, it's almost this other thing.
Yeah.
It'd be this porter is a pale ale if it didn't have all these roasted barley and these totally different hops. But enough of what it's like on paper. We want to talk about what it's like in the glass. World famous badass Bryan Adams likes to say, you better come with some libations. So I did. I brought Abby 2 of the examples that I used in the article. This is Dayblock Brewing in Minneapolis. They're Chillum Cold IPA, and this is Bent Brew Distillery, our good friend Chris England here in Roseville, Minnesota, where we are. This is Bent Brew Distillery's Thawless Victory.
Nice.
Apparently it's a reference to a video game.
I didn't get that reference, to be honest. I didn't know what it was referencing.
Flawless Victory.
I thought it was like it's cold and it's like thawing, but
Ooh.
something about I don't know what I thought
Something
it.
about how cold.
I don't know what I thought it meant.
So cheers, Abby. Let's
This
do
one?
Bent first,
This
actually,
one?
on the right.
Okay.
Thawless.
I already drank some.
Okay. So quick look at the ingredients here. We're talking 70% U.S. Pils malt, 20% flaked rice, 10% sugar, all cryo hops, Amarillo, Cryopop, Equinaut, no boil hops, which is kind of unique among the ones we had, all Whirlpool dry hopped. Chris England fermented it with 3470 lager dry yeast, and he fermented it at 62. So from what you would be led to believe about ale and lager yeast, yes, that is the upper end for sure, and maybe even beyond of what you're told. But the beauty of this style that I think it's actually revealing to people is a lot of lager strains can actually ferment that high. People think it has to ferment cold. It's like, it doesn't really. It needs to condition cold, but
I think
know.
what I think is interesting, and maybe it's just me being newer to brewing, I guess I kind of thought if you went outside of like the range of temperature for ale yeast or lager yeast that you'd get like weird off flavors. Like, oh, you should be
Yeah.
brewing this cooler or warmer. And since we're not, I thought that I don't know,
Yeah.
like I thought weird shit would happen, but like it's a whole style that like it almost seems like it shouldn't work, but it works.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what, and I hope by making an IPA slightly different is like helping people realize is, so what I've learned is apparently the warm fermented lager strains actually helps push out esters as well. Cold fermenting, you know, because an ale yeast, the warmer you ferment it, gets all these fruity esters, which you might want depending on what you're brewing. But if you're trying to brew something where the malt pretty much is like low/neutral,
Yeah.
the yeast is very neutral, and the hops are way up here, it makes sense that you would try to push an ale yeast as cold as you could get it, as long as it's not stalling and it's healthy enough to keep doing its thing. I think the big thing that's opening people's eyes is more, and we should totally do like some side-by-side and a video and who knows what about this, but like take some of these lager strains. I mean, I heard from at least 2 brewers, they're like, this really isn't that far out of the range. We would have done a lager fermentation anyway. Again, it boils down to like, but it wouldn't sit for a week or 2 and then get served. It would sit for a month and
Right.
become a lager at that point.
Yeah, I think that's another thing that people who are like, it's an IPL, well, you're not lagering any of these.
What do you think?
It's so subtle. You're not like, wow, this is a crazy new, wildly different. It's not like I'm drinking, I don't know, like when Sour Milkshake, whatever came out, people, whether you like it or not,
Right.
it's very different. This is just very subtle in how it's different.
I get a bit of citrus actually, stone fruit, this a little bit of kind of like tropical fruit, but way more just like orangey, lemony. It's very good. It's kind of like you said. It's not like a lot of new styles where when something gets introduced, you really have to reacclimate yourself to it. I mean, if anything, it's a new style that's trying to kind of like promote an older style, an older way of making IPAs a little bit.
Yeah.
It's not the most bitter. It's got a firm, nice soft bitterness, and I think that's because there's no boil hops. It's all that kind of whirlpool and dry hop, which makes them almost kind of an any IPA like, but there's still, I mean, any IPA's got so much body, wheat and oats and stuff like clouding it up. This one has the enjoyability of that hop profile without feeling like you're drinking a glass of like maltomeal. What about our second one, Chillum Cold IPA from Dayblock? They took an ale yeast route using a Kolsch strain, fermenting it cool. It's 80% German pills, 20% toasted flaked rice, experimental hop HBC 522 for bittering, Azacca and Amarillo throughout the boil, into the fermenter during the knockout transfer. Omega's Kolsch 1 fermented at 54 and got down to 1003. So very dry, very light, noticeably more bitter, which makes sense. It's got boil kettle additions. It's got additions like throughout the boil, not just one at the beginning.
I feel like what's weird is it doesn't smell as hoppy to me.
As the first one?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that makes sense because Chris basically backloaded his cold IPA, and it definitely like pops. This one, and this is the beauty of cold IPA too, it's like even as a new style, it's already got a pretty big range of what you can expect.
Yeah.
But as long as it ticks a few of these boxes, it kind of falls in.
Like
I
I
agree. This is way more like what I would call like a light, not meaning LITE, but just like a light West Coast IPA because it's got none of that like sea malt body and richness. But it's more of an, I don't know, it just seems more of an IPA. Old school IPA, I guess I should say.
I feel like it's it's surprising to me how different they are.
When you go back and forth though, now Chris really has this like bouquet of hops, which is really nice. You know, the hops over here are more classic. That experimental hop is supposedly very much like Columbus and Cascade, so it makes sense that this one has that kind of West Coast vibe. Still got like tropical fruit, a little citrus in this one, but the bitterness definitely kind of like comes out full force. I also noted that the first time I had this during writing the article, I kind of thought there might be another malt in there, like Victory or something. And I asked my friend brewer Mike O'Hara, I was just like, are y'all cheating a little and putting just a little Victory? He's like, no, it's toasted flaked rice. And he's like, I legit think that gives it this kind of like dark malt kind of vibe without the body that throwing even like a crystal 15 or 20 in there would. So that's Cold IPA in a nutshell. We are by no stretch of the imagination experts, but we've done thorough investigation
We've done
on these styles.
research.
They're very different from each other. These two, the dozen or so we had, were all very different, but also similar in a way. Recipe for these two pro brews are in the blog link in the video description below, as well as just like these head brewers and pro brewers came up off a lot of good information that might help steer you in the right direction if whether or not you want to make a cold IPA or just kind of change up something else that you're doing when it comes to IPAs. We'll hope you check that out.
And we want to hear from you, not so that we can call you out in future videos, but no, we do like hearing from you, even if it's negative comments. I feel like I said at the beginning, I think that gives us a good chance to, like, maybe sometimes we're not explaining a style right,
Yeah.
or it gives us a chance to be like, hey, that's a common misconception, or hey, I get why it sounds like it should be called warm IPL, which sounds very unappealing. So that's the reason, FYI, that no one would call it that you'd go with cold IPA instead of warm IPL. But no, leave us your comments. Hopefully, even if it sounds like a gimmick, you'll try it. Just to see if you like it or not. Let us know on social.
Yeah, and of course, our research and development squad are hard at work. They're going to be test brewing a couple of cold IPAs over the next week or two, and you can expect a kit from Northern Brewer a little bit later in the summer. So we're going to help you brew a cold IPA.
Get ready.
If you want to just kind of hang tight, get through the 4th of July, go hang out, we'll get you. Just you look for the kit. We got this, y'all. All right, everybody. Well, cheers. Keep it cold.
Nice.
What's cooler than cool?
Cold IPA.
Ice cold.